You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Durr.
This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly is brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com, Caneswear.com. And welcome back, listeners, to the newest episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly. I am your host, Kevin Dern. You can follow me on Twitter at KevinMD4. You can follow the show at DolphinsTalk.com. YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, wherever else you listen to your podcasts. And in this week's installment, we're going to continue our series of kind of breaking down a position group each episode. And we'll start to crank these out a little faster as we are now, 2 days by the time you listen to this, away from the opening of training camp 2025 for the Miami Dolphins. And in this episode, we will do a whiskey segment. I know we had a little bit of a somber moment the last episode. Whiskey segment tonight. I don't think it's a new one, but we'll do it anyway. And then I thought it would be kind of fun because a friend of mine who's a Packers fan, he and I were talking about this a couple days ago. And, what are the 3 keys to success for the Dolphins to be good this year is what he asked me. And I wanted to take that a little bit of a step further because I thought it made an interesting topic, especially as we're on near the eve of training camp. So 3 keys to success for the Dolphins this year, both offensively and defensively. And then, as promised, we will touch on the offensive line. We talked about the defensive line last segment, so we'll talk about the other Dolphins rebuild of the trenches. This week's whiskey segment, nothing new. I haven't been able to get a new bottle lately. I actually have, 5 bottles I've got sitting on my, we'll call it the whiskey table that are unopened at the moment that I just haven't had a chance to try. This one tonight, mostly just trying to finish it off because I've had this barrel a long time. I think this is the second or third time I've had this one reviewed on the show. All of these reviews are from the same bottle, but it is the Peerless Distillery, their rye whiskey. I think we talked about it. It's overpriced, but if you like rye whiskey, if you like the taste of apple, this one's for you. Got a nice little spice finish to it. And I'm not a big rye fan myself, but this one's pretty easy drinking. And it's not going to overpower you with, flavor or spice or anything like that. But if you're used to bourbon, this might be a good avenue for you to cross over and try a rye. Again, just caution on the price point. I think I've seen this, for as low as like 105. I think the one I bought was 107. I've seen it at other stores now for 115. So a little more expensive than what I would typically buy, but a solid one. I'd give it a 3.2 out of 5 this time, just kind of based on my expanded palate and tastes as they've grown. But we'll go ahead and dive into our first segment. And again, this was brought to me by a friend of mine who's a Packers fan. It was just kind of, what are the 3 things the Dolphins need to do to be good this year? And I wanted to break this down, offense and defense. I think special teams is kind of at this point would be like, okay, if they finally got rid of Danny Crossman, it's hard to be much worse. Kyle Krabs did a great episode a month or so ago that talked about the Dolphins and how their metrics stack up when they face winning teams, and their special teams were like 31st out of 32 in EPA for special teams. About the only thing that goes right is Jason Sanders continues to be a heck of a kicker. Not much else has gone right for the Dolphins in terms of special teams. So that one, I think just by having Joe Cardona, I think we assume that Stonehouse is probably going to win the punting job, and we have probably less beholden, or the Dolphins are probably less beholden to veteran guys who weren't cutting the mustard. Example, Duke Riley from last year. But I wanted to primarily focus on offense and defense. Okay. And we're going to build these up from 3, meaning, okay, this is the third most important key up to the first most important key for success on both sides of the ball. And we'll start on offense. Usually I'm a defensive guy first, but we'll go offense tonight. And this one is simply to be better running the football. And I know that sounds easy and cliche and common sense, and it is. But if you look at where the Dolphins have been in terms of ranking, 2023, they were great at running the football. I believe they were second in the league, only behind Baltimore that year. I think their EPA was like 7th or 8th that year. The other 2 years under Mike McDaniel haven't been as good. 2022 was not good. Their EPA was like, I want to say 21st. Last year was like 27th. And you look at what the inability to be able to run the ball does to this offense. Now, I think we have to state that tougher for the Dolphins to be able to run the ball when Tua Tagovailoa is out, and the only threats you have were Skylar Thompson, Tyler Huntley, and a couple instances of Tim Boyle at quarterback last year. The defense is able to key in on that. They don't have to respect your deep passing game as much. They're able to bring a safety down or buzz a safety down at the snap and kind of fence you in. What I think the Dolphins ought to strive for, obviously they want to be the best in the league. Every team does. But I think if the Dolphins could just get to the middle of the pack in terms of running the football, be somewhere in like between 10 and 20, okay? Both in total yards per carry and EPA. Just be more efficient. Be able to break some of those 10-yard plus runs. I think the Dolphins were pretty low in that category last year, one of the lowest in the league. I do know that they led the league last year in runs that went for 0 yards or negative yards because they just couldn't get push off the line of scrimmage. You had, poor play calling at times, and that's something we'll talk about. But if you can just get decent running ability, and I think if you can get a good mixture the way you had in 2023 when you could use Devon Achane as kind of the weapon and then use Raheem Mostert as kind of the steady, inside zone, outside zone, here's what we're going to do. We need 4 yards, on this play. We can get 5. If you can figure out a way to make most likely Jalen Wright that guy, or get those kind of carries from Alexander Madison, Ollie Gordon, or another addition if they make one, post cuts or something like that. I think you can use Devon Achane in more clever ways to kind of help free up Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I also think that if you're able to at least run the ball, successfully more frequently, that is to say, get at least 3 yards more frequently than you did last year, you're going to have to force defenses to respect that run game, which thereby opens up some more of the play action stuff. And we kind of know the story with the Dolphins offense was that last year, teams sort of figured out all the motions. They figured out, okay, we need to play in 2-man shells or quarter shells and play deep. We're not giving up big plays. We'll just keep everything in front of us, and we can probably stop their run with a 6-man box. And Miami had to throw a bazillion screens and, You had to use Waddle. You had to use Tyreek, on screens a lot more than, maybe you ideally should. You had to throw the ball to Achane a ton out of the backfield. Not a great circumstance. So I think if you're able to run the ball, it helps you free up a lot more schematically in terms of what you can do. And I think what's more with that running game is you have a slashing back with Jalen Wright. You don't necessarily always need to get him outside where he can use his speed. If you can do some of the inside zone stuff that you could do with Raheem Mostert, I think Jalen Wright, just based on what his film was like coming out of the University of Tennessee, is able to do some of that stuff. And I think you have better options now, in third down and fourth down and short situations with bigger backs. Might still be Jalen Wright, who is rumored to have put on about 6 pounds of muscle this offseason. But maybe you find a role for Alexander Mattison or Ollie Gordon, become sort of a dedicated big back guy. In the past, that's been Jeff Wilson because he physically ran hard. But at his heaviest with the Dolphins, Jeff Wilson was only ever 210 pounds. That's not exactly a big back. So I think if you can run the ball better, more efficiently, doesn't have to be like gangbusters, top 5 in the league. Just be more efficient. It's going to open up more facets of your offense, both running and in the passing game. Number 2, this one is the obvious one. We all know it. It's, can Tua Tagovailoa stay healthy? Now you think back throughout the course of we'll just count his Dolphins career. We know the injury history he came into the league with, but think back to the injuries he's had. His rookie year, bangs his thumb on a helmet, has to miss a game against the Jets. Not really anybody's fault. It's just a freak thing that happens. 2021, Jesse Davis either whiffs the block or misses the call or whatever it was. A.J. Epinesa flies around, hits Tua, from the blind side, breaks a couple ribs, punctures his lung, he's out. That's on the offensive line. Most everything since has not been on the offensive line. You think about the concussion that Tua had in Cincinnati on Thursday night. I was there. He could have thrown that ball away 3 separate times instead of hanging on to it. Like, that was a completely unnecessary sack he took, and it cost them, 3 games? The week before, he didn't know how to fall and protect himself properly when he ran out of the pocket, and one of the Buffalo defenders tripped him by the ankle. Kind of the same deal happened against Green Bay at the end of the year. 2023, he stays healthy. 2024, he runs headfirst into Damar Hamlin. That's bad. Against the Texans later in the season, there's a play that's going to be called back, and he dives forward even though he's not getting the first down and takes a hit. Then he gets hit in San Francisco. It's just, Tua's got to stay healthy. And I think in terms of big picture, the Dolphins have basically engineered a fork-in-the-road decision to make after the season. Like it or not, this is what they've done financially. Path A is if the Dolphins do well, if Tua stays healthy, which I would take to mean at least he's played 13 or more games in the regular season. They either compete for a playoff spot or they have a winning season and miss the playoffs. Maybe they win a playoff game. That feels like their absolute ceiling if everything goes right, which in the NFL, nothing ever goes completely right. But if that's the case, then you can take these extra draft picks, you can take the influx of cash and try and build around him after this season. Fork B is the opposite of that. Tua gets hurt, he misses, 5 or more games, or the team just doesn't play well, the offense falls apart. You can take those extra picks and extra cash dollars, get rid of Tua, and maneuver as needed to go select another quarterback in the draft, most likely with a different front office and coaching staff, in the building as well. So the Dolphins have given themselves some short-term and long-term freedom. But it all comes down to Tua's health. As you look at some of the games last year that Miami lost with Tua, you think back to Arizona and Buffalo, you had dumb mistakes by the defense, both involving Jordan Poyer in that game, in both of those games late, and you lost on walk-off field goals. Anthony Weaver, probably the worst call he made all year was on that 3rd and 1 in the Arizona game on the final drive, putting Jordan Poyer one-on-one with Trey McBride, who had already had like 8 or 9 catches in the game and 100-plus yards. Like, that was just contemptibly stupid on Weaver's part to think Jordan Poyer could execute that. The next week, Cam Smith actually makes a play on Keon Coleman, the Bills' rookie receiver, on that deep ball. The Bills are going to have to punt. Smith knocks it away, but Jordan Poyer comes over trying to be the hero and delivers a headshot. Gives the Bills a free first down. They go down, they hit a 61-yard field goal to win it. Like, those are 2 games Miami could have won, and arguably 2 of Tua's better games on the season. That Bills game might have been his best game ever, in my opinion. The road game. You win those 2, you're 10-7. And you're in the playoffs. Like, that's literally how close Miami was last year, despite not feeling that way most of the year and being a pretty unfun team to watch and a dislikable team on top of it. So if you can keep Tua healthy, like, hear me out here. Let's not pretend the Dolphins have to play a gauntlet of a schedule. You've still got a number of bad teams. Indianapolis can't figure out a quarterback. That should give you a good barometer right there week 1. If you struggle with them, you're probably not going to have too good of a season. But you still get to play Indianapolis, who can't solve a quarterback. You still get to play the Jets twice, the Patriots twice, the Saints, who might be the worst team in the league this year, the Panthers. Like, even if the worst occurs and you're missing Tua for a good chunk or all of the season, there's still enough bad teams on there that the Dolphins are probably going to claw 5 or 6 wins just by virtue of having to play those guys. When you look at some of the other factors, you don't really have a difficult road schedule. Like, the furthest you're traveling, excluding the Spain game, the furthest you're traveling on the road is to Indianapolis week 1. You're in the Eastern time zone the whole year, except for the Spain game. You have Buffalo on a short week. Like, you might as well just mark that as an L in pen right now. But the rest of the season, there's not really a tricky road game in there till late in the year. You have to take a trip to Pittsburgh in mid-December. That's not going to be fun. Maybe they've imploded by then, but I would still think like primetime game, Monday night, the weather, not a good mix for the Dolphins. Other than that, though, most of the difficult teams you play this year are at home. You get the Chargers coming from the West Coast for a 1 o'clock start. You get the Ravens at home on a short week, so they're at a disadvantage for that. You get the Bengals coming to town, the Buccaneers coming to town. I mean, you play the Commanders in Spain. Like, other than Pittsburgh and at Buffalo, the toughest road game I feel like the Dolphins have is Atlanta, maybe, just based on how things are. We'll see how Tua's really developed because he gets to go up against Vrabel's defense, which has short-circuited him badly twice now in his career. Let's see if he can get over that hump. But if he stays healthy, there's no reason to think the Dolphins can't win at least 7 or 8 games. Which brings us to key number 1. Because you are going to play teams that in recent history have a history of making the playoffs. And that goes to Mike McDaniel and the order of operations stuff with the Dolphins. Kyle Krabs, I'll reference that episode again. Under McDaniel, the Dolphins are 4-16 against playoff teams. 4-16. You've had numerous issues where basically in those games against playoff teams, about the only facet of the Dolphins that plays well is the run defense and Jason Sanders. That's about it. Their offensive EPA goes down. The run game EPA goes way down. Special teams is horrid. Tua goes from being top 5, top 7 in most metrics to being average. He's about the best thing they've got going on offense in those games. But being between 14th and 20th when everything else around you goes to hell in a handbasket isn't going to help you. You look at some of the McDaniel, like, chasing the game flow. Again, this example sticks out in my mind. You go back to week 2 last year. You've got the Bills at home Thursday night, short week. Things don't really go your way. You get an unlucky interception when it hits Grant Dubose and bounces to a Bills safety. You have Tua makes another a bad throw, and you're down 17-7. And right before the half, the Bills stop Miami around midfield. Miami should punt. They get the ball to start the second half. If you punt, you pin the Bills deep. Unless you have a complete mental breakdown, the Bills are probably going to run out the clock or have to punt it back to you with minimal time left. Instead, the Dolphins go for it. They don't make it. The Bills start at the 49-yard line, and the Dolphins have a run defense breakdown because David Long hits the wrong gap. James Cook goes 49 yards for a touchdown. What was a 10-point game now becomes a 17-point game, and you're that much further away because you made a gamble. He needs to stop doing that. He needs to work on his challenges. I believe he's challenged 23 times now as a head coach. He's only won 4. So I think McDaniel needs to, I wouldn't say, and I've never been an advocate for him to relinquish play calling. Like, you brought him here to fix Tua and fix this offense, and he's done that, and he's shown he can call those games. It's everything else that a head coach has to do. He's got the wrong people on the microphone, or he's listening to the wrong people, or they're telling him one thing and he's going with his gut. They need to fix that system. Flush out the bad decisions that they've made collectively and just be smart. Like, I know leads feel insurmountable at times. Football's a long game. A lot can happen. Like, just be patient. To me, and I've said this before on the show, Mike McDaniel feels a lot like Jim Tressel when he was at Ohio State. Ohio State, always in the top 10, always played well, contending for the Big Ten, national championships. But man, they were a front-running team. If they ever got down by more than 7, you could kind of see Tressel panic. That's what it feels like with McDaniel when they go down by 10 plus. Like, you have the offense. Their defense, for the most part, has been pretty good in McDaniel's tenure. Be patient. We'll have another sip of our Peerless Rye. As we move on to segment 2, I have a little water to top that one off. Defensively, the 3 keys is better pass rush. You didn't have Bradley Chubb a year ago. You lost Jalen Phillips. Again, Jordan Poyer. You lost Jalen Phillips in week 4. Didn't have him for the rest of the season. We've talked, a lot about Chop Robinson on this channel and how well he played, especially the last 8 games, despite really not having a true pass rush threat opposite him. Emmanuel Ogbah tried but was playing with a torn bicep from the bye week on. You had to put Calais Campbell out as a defensive end at times in a 4-man front. You had to put Zach Sealer out there. They played with Matt Dickerson. People probably forget, but we had Tyus Bowser out there for a number of games. Mo Kamara was out there, not really ready for it. Quentin Bell, good Sam linebacker, not a good defensive end in this system. In the 4-man nickel fronts that Miami played most of the time. Better pass rush is going to help a lot with this defense because you just didn't have it. You went from setting a franchise record under Fangio the year before, I think with 56 or 58 sacks. You dropped to 35, which was 27th in the league. 27th in the league. Number 2, piggybacking off of that, is going to be secondary play. Okay? This is a very heavy zone-based defense, And you have to have guys that know where to be, even if they weren't physical freaks last year or kind of breaking down physically. I'm looking at Jalen Ramsey, Kendall Fuller, Javon Holland, the corpse of Jordan Poyer that was out there. They at least were smart enough to get aligned correctly most of the time and not botch the coverages. But when you think about it, the Dolphins played the 7th most nickel in the league last year. If you look at the top 5 defensive backs that they had last year, 4 are gone. Only Kader Kohou is left. And as I mentioned on the last episode, coming out of minicamp, the top 3 corners were Storm Duck, Kader Kohou, and Kendall Sheffield. That's not exactly an inspiring lineup. And I do think the Dolphins will make an addition to the corner room, but I think it's probably going to come more into camp. I don't think it'll be right away. I think they're going to want to see how Cam Smith responds to not being handed the job outright. I think they're going to want to see, does Jason Marshall have enough juice to compete for a role right off the bat? What does Kendall Sheffield do? Does anyone else step up? Because I think they're comfortable with Storm Duck and Kader Kohou as corners. And truthfully, if you've heard me talk or seen my threads on Twitter all off season, I was more concerned about the safety room than I was the corner room, despite the lack of, name recognizable talent at the corner room. But now that the Dolphins have acquired Minkah Fitzpatrick, I do agree he's lost a step in terms of just overall speed. But it's his mind, his football intelligence that what intrigues me, because this is not like the Flores or Boyer defense where you're asking one player to basically be a center fielder, the way that the Ravens did with Ed Reed, or like you look at some good defenses of the past, Glover Quinn in Detroit, Earl Thomas in Seattle. This isn't that. Even though this defense plays a lot of cover 3, it's a lot of disguised cover 3 where you're not going to have to make one player responsible for the entire middle without some sort of help. It's pretty rare that they don't have help coming. So I feel like with Minkah's ability to direct traffic, you're at least going to have guys get lined up, and as long as they can get to the right spots, coupled with the pass rush, I think you're going to get home a little bit more efficiently than you did in 2024. Now, I still have reservations about a lot of the personnel in the secondary, but with the way the defense is built to function, they're not as... My concerns are not as big as most fans of the team. Number 1 would be generating turnovers. Okay? A lot of people don't realize, especially fans of other team. I talked to my friend who is the Packers fan about this. And he's like, aren't you concerned about your defense? And I was like, well, look at their depth chart from last year. And then consider that the Dolphins were 10th in scoring defense, 4th in total defense, 9th in rushing defense, 9th in passing defense, 5th in red zone defensive efficiency, which is, however many times your opponent got to the red zone, how many times did you give up a score? Dolphins were 5th best in the league. They're also 5th in third down defense. They were pretty good in most facets other than generating defensive plays. We talked about it. They were 27th in sacks with 35, and they were 27th in takeaways with just 16. So if you're able to generate some more of these game-changing plays, and you get better pass rush, which is going to help the secondary, which is going to free up some guys, notably Minkah Fitzpatrick and probably Jordan Brooks, just based on what they would do coverage-wise, to take a few more chances. I think overall you're going to drive, I won't promise a ton of success, but I think you'll at least see the defense remain stable. They'll be top 10 in points allowed. they'll probably be top 5, top 10 in total defense. I think their run defense may improve in year 2 now that you've got better linebacker play. You don't always have to have Tyrell Dodson out on the field with Jordan Brooks. You can keep him on the field in nickel and passing situations, and that's fine. He's a good athlete. But I think you've got some comfortability now in bringing in a Willie Gay Jr. or a KJ Britt to help in run situations, or to be the one off-ball guy in nickel behind a wide-bodied Kenneth Grant up front, which allows you to expand that front and play like a true 6-man front. It allows you to do different things with Jordan Brooks, where you can walk him out into the flat as an overhang defender, as a blitzer. You can play him in the slot. All kinds of cool stuff you can do with him now that you have some more beef in the middle with Kenneth Grant and whoever that off-ball linebacker is when you take Tyrell Dodson off the field. The defense feels like the better unit going into the season, even though you didn't really associate the Dolphins with playing good defense a year ago. And now into our offensive line segment. We'll take a sip of water for this one because we need to keep our wits about us. So, the 5 starters, at least going into camp on paper, because we still don't know if James Daniels is cleared yet. But the way that they've lined up from left tackle to right tackle, so left to right, appear to be Patrick Paul, Jonas Avaianaya, who's been at left guard since the rookie camp and through OTAs and minicamp. This isn't something new. He's done it all off season. Aaron Brewer at center, James Daniels once he's cleared at right guard, and Austin Jackson at right tackle. If anything, it allows you to at least be bigger and more stout through the middle. James Daniels is a pretty effective pass blocking guard. Jonas Avaianaya played left and right tackle, probably the best pass blocking guard in the draft in terms of footwork and technique, even though he played tackle. I have some questions about both of their run blocking ability, which is why I'm not proclaiming them to be like the next Rob Hunt or anything like that. But I think you'll see a little bit more of a stable, solidified pocket. How many games last year did you see like Robert Jones let someone in, or Liam Eichenberg let someone in, where it's disrupting the timing and Tua's got to get off of his spot or maneuver in the pocket? You can't be efficient in this offense the way it's designed to be run when you're moving the quarterback off the spot as frequently as happened last year. So you've got to be more cognizant of that. And I think that'll help. The question I have, let's take the 5 starters individually. We'll go through that, and then we'll go through my other concerns. Patrick Paul, for a rookie, played 337 snaps. And I know people are worried about the inexperience and all that. But in the same breath, they say, we've got Keon Smith. He's an experienced player. He's been on the team for 4 years. The guy's only played 70 snaps. That's like barely more than an average game's worth of snaps. I think Patrick Paul will tend to be fine. Yeah, I think, and I would recommend watching Eric Smith on X do some of his breakdowns, or Ryder McConville's breakdown of Patrick Paul. But think about the great pass blocking left tackles we've seen in recent years. Trent Williams from San Francisco is an absolute animal. He's the best one in the league. Laramie Tunsil's been really good as a pass protector. Most Dolphins fans probably didn't realize it, but Teron Armstead was really, really fucking good as a pass protector. Just wasn't always out there. Rashawn Slater's been really good. If you go back and watch some of the great ones in recent years, Joe Thomas or Ryan Clady or Walter Jones, or even if you want to go for the mountaintop and watch Anthony Munoz, you watch all those guys. They're very athletic. They're light on their feet. They're able to deliver the left-handed punch and then get that second arm in there. What you see with Patrick Paul is he's still pretty light on his feet for a bigger guy, and rumor is he's dropped about 12 to 15 pounds this offseason. but he doesn't really throw that powerful, like, left cross, that jab punch. It's more of a two-handed, swooping, like a pterodactyl coming in to land type clamp maneuver. And he basically exposes his chest plate and allows defenders to get right into it. But he's so big and long, he can just kind of absorb it. So what I would encourage you to do, if you have some doubts or want to cast aspersions at Patrick Paul, go back and watch his film at left tackle last year. It doesn't look pretty, but ask yourself, like, other than the game against Myles Garrett where he came in cold off the bench, what did he really do that was horrendously bad? Like, it doesn't look pretty, but it's efficient. With Jonas Savaiinaea, I've talked about his concerns, run blocking, not getting his hand placement correct, especially in the run game, getting high up on people's pads. And then he has a weird tendency to try and, like, look back for the running back to try and set up his block, and he disengages. If you can get him more comfortable with playing left guard and just get him comfortable with doing what he's supposed to do in the run scheme, I think he's going to be fine. It's not like Patrick Paul was playing next to, like, some all-pro like Steve Hutchinson or something like that, or Keith Sims last year. He was playing next to Robert Jones, like a below-average NFL starter, and still managed to do pretty well. They had some hiccups with Myles Garrett trying to pass him off on stunts. Every team's going to have some hiccups here and there with Myles Garrett. Like, that's just how good of a player Myles Garrett is. Savaiinaea, I would say, just come in, do your job. At worst, he's going to be Robert Jones all over. I don't think Savaiinaea is going to be that bad. I think there's just too much talent to be able to work with and mold for him to be that bad. Aaron Brewer, probably the best offensive player the Dolphins had last year, of all positions. Like, just do what you did last year. Don't break your hand in the preseason. James Daniels, the concern there is coming off the Achilles. Are you going to recapture the form that you had as a Steeler, where he was one of the better right guards in football? Or do you need to move him around? Do you have to shuffle the lineup and have him play left guard, which I wouldn't want to do. If you go back all the way to his one-on-one interview with Travis Wingfield, towards the end of that interview, after Miami first signed him, he specifically mentions slotting in between the center and right tackle. That clearly seems like the plan for what they want him to be. Sort of much like we talked about the nuggets they dropped with Jordan Phillips as a defensive tackle, not necessarily being a nose. Kind of the same deal here. I think as long as James Daniels is close to where he was pre-Achilles injury, you're going to be solid across the front. And for Austin Jackson, the last year and a half has been his best football. He tore his meniscus on the last offensive play of the Bills game in the road. He had a couple bad reps against Von Miller in week 2 when, that is the nightmare scenario for the Dolphins, when you've got to just sit back there and pass because you're so far behind. We talked about that last year. Otherwise, he's played a good year and a half worth of football. Is he worth the contract extension? Probably not, but it's been consistently good. I think this offensive line, if you can get from being like one of the worst 5 units to being like a little below average or to like the middle of the pack, this offense will take a rise, much like the run game. The one thing is the true pass blocking, because you had Teron Armstead was phenomenal at it. I think he was the number 2 pass block win rate tackle in the league last year. Everyone else was pretty bad, minus Aaron Brewer. Brewer was solid. Just be a little bit better. Now, I think the issue that you have here is the Dolphins, Chris Greer specifically called out before the season that, it's time for us to invest in the offensive line. And if you look at that starting 5 left to right, second-round pick in Patrick Paul, second-round pick that we traded multiple picks to go get, and Jonas Savaianaya. We have a center who's an $8 million a year player in Aaron Brewer. We have a right guard who's an $8 million a year player in James Daniels. We have a first-round pick who's on an extension in Austin Jackson at right tackle. That's some pretty decent capital you've put into that. But is that enough of an investment when you consider their depth? Now, obviously they brought in Larry Borum. They brought back Liam Eichenberg. But most of their other outside additions are coming from UDFAs. And I think it's curious that during OTAs and minicamp, when James Daniels was still not cleared, Keon Smith got the bulk of the work at right guard. Jackson Carman also worked in at right guard. Carman was I won't say great, but he was at least an adequate starter for the Bengals at left guard during their Super Bowl run in 2021. So maybe there's something there. But that begs the question, because I know Ryan Hayes was their left tackle on the number 2 team offensive line. That's something you don't want. And you probably don't want Larry Borum as a tackle at all, based on his film in Chicago. So are you fully trusting like Keon Smith to be like the ultimate swing player by getting reps at guard? Remember last year, they tried to let him compete at left guard with Robert Jones. He got rolled up on because Ryan Hayes missed a block in the preseason, tore his ACL, done for the year. Are you going to make him the true swing tackle when he's only played 70 career snaps in the NFL in regular season games? That's a big bet. Are you betting on Larry Borum? Because based on his Bears tape, that's a bet you shouldn't be making. Liam Eichenberg you brought back, and I get it. It's valuable to have a lineman who, in a dire circumstance, could jump in at any of the 5 positions. Eichenberg has started at all 5 positions during his time as a Dolphin. Pretty rare thing. And I think you can probably survive if he has to play guard or center. If he has to play like 2 or 3 games there, you can probably work around that. Butch Barry's done a pretty good job of doing things like that. But you can probably work around that. But if he's got to do it for the whole season, you don't want to have to relive what you went through last year. Beyond those guys, though, all of whom have pretty serious question marks, there's not much proven depth at all. Andrew Meyer is a name that Chris Greer held up, and it's a name that Dolphins fans like to hold up. The guy didn't play a single regular season snap. It's still an unknown to him, the Dolphins, and us as fans. You look at the other additions they've made, like Ryan Hayes was a draft pick of theirs. He's a Michigan guy, so I get the implication. But, he hasn't played a regular season snap in his career either in Miami or Indianapolis when he was on their practice squad for 2 separate stints. Hasn't done it. Braden Daniels, there's a reason you can pick up a guy like that in November or December every year. Not an adequate player. And on top of that, you've got, you have an IPP player with Baron Matos who is still new to football, playing basketball for the University of South Florida before he went into the IPP program. And you've got 3 undrafted free agents in Teddy Cushy, Josh Preeb, and Addison West. And really the only one that I'm mildly intrigued by is Addison West. Eric Smith, again, go watch his breakdown on Addison West, but he played for Western Michigan. I believe he was on one of the All-American teams at the end of the year. I want to say a second-team All-American. He had a great year. He really did. The intriguing moment for Addison West was, I believe it was Western Michigan's first or second game last year. They had to go play Ohio State in the Horseshoe at night. Not a good proposition. It's basically, your MAC school, you're making money off that loss. Like the second or third play of the game, their starting center breaks his leg or ankle or something, he's out. He's done. And they put Addison West in, and you've got to go against Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton and Caden Curry and all the guys that they've got. They're going to, Tyleik Williams went in the first round. Ty Hamilton was drafted. They're going to have more guys from that D-line drafted in the next year or two. And Addison West held his own, having never played center before. Like, he has a little bit more length and a lot more power than what Andrew Meyer gave us last year. And it's one of those situations where if you gave Addison West the easy moving ability, the athleticism that you have in Andrew Meyer, if you combine those two, you've got one pretty solid backup center, maybe even someone who can compete at guard. But ultimately, like, I feel like there's an addition Miami needs to make, and most teams in the NFL feel this sting every year where, you need good, proven linemen. And the Dolphins don't even have a starting 5 consisting of proven linemen. 3 out of the 5, I'll give Patrick Paul the benefit of the doubt, but you still got another rookie. None of your depth players. I guess the best case you could make would be Liam Eichenberg. None of them are proven adequate players. Eichenberg's below average at best. So that's kind of my take on the offensive line in a nutshell. I think you've got the makings of a group who can be efficient, maybe not a bunch of road graders, but enough to where you've got more stoutness to be able to protect Tua, not get the pocket collapsed, at least make the run game more consistent. Is that enough of an investment? In my eyes, no. I think you need to do a little bit more. But I like the trend that's going on. And if you were to keep that trend going on and those guys stay healthy, I think that spells good things for the offense in 2025. All right. That's been a heck of an episode here, 45 minutes. I didn't really intend for it to be that long, but hey, the whiskey's flowing. That's going to do it for me tonight. Hopefully have another show up by the end of the week. We'll talk about another position group, maybe 2, just to kind of churn through these before we get into preseason games. So I'll make an announcement on Twitter about that before we go to the next episode. But that's going to do it for me. Again, KevinMD4 on Twitter. You can follow me on DolphinsTalk.com, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, wherever else you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to check out the other great episodes. I know Mike and Marissa have been killing it with their interviews. Watch the Same Old Dolphins show with Aaron and Josh. Check out everything we've got going on at DolphinsTalk.com. Thanks, guys. That's going to do it for me. Fins up, and we'll be back with another episode later this week. This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly was brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is a spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com, Caneswear.com.